Okay, so what is deep sea? It's an interdisciplinary study of deep sea to coast connectivity in the northern Gulf of Mexico. And the overarching question that we were trying to answer is what are the environmental consequences of petroleum hydrocarbon release in the deep sea on living marine resources and ecosystem health? So why the northeast Gulf of Mexico? Observations from the spill really showed that the DeSoto Canyon may or act a little bit as a conduit to move the oil from the deep ocean into shore. The region is a hotspot of biological and productivity, and also there's a lot of talks about how to use maybe hydrocarbon resources in the area. So the questions, what are the spatial and temporal scales of hydrodynamic processes that transport particles from the deep Gulf to the shelf waters? How are these influenced by topography such as the canyon and shelf? And how do the transport of those particles influence the geochemical and the biological processes? So it's a pretty large consortium, about 12 institutions. One thing that we're quite proud is the number of students that were involved. Just about a large number of PhDs and masters, but also about 56 undergrad and quite very active high school students. Produced about 106 or 104 review articles. A lot of data sets were put on the Gomory website, and over 400 presentations. So here, what I'm going to do is just highlight in some simple words, or at least the way some of the research that has been accomplished. First, by the UTEL and Coastal labs, about the microbial degradation of buried oil in Florida beaches. In a 2-year time series, the in situ response and the recovery of the microbial communities was coupled to the chemical evolution of the petroleum hydrocarbons from the Macondo oil. The majority of those hydrocarbons that came ashore were degraded within 6 months and pretty much gone after a year. And the temperature was found to be the pivotal factor. In the summer, during hot, the oil degraded much faster than in the winter months. The buried oil layers also consume 4 to 5 times more oxygen and produce up to 6 times more carbon dioxide than the unpolluted beach sand, and revealing very strong aerobic microbial decomposition activities. And then some modeling allows a little bit for some prediction on how a beach could recover from this. So you can summarize things by saying that those results can be used to design better response in the case of a future beach contamination. Correxit. Crude oil attaches readily to sand grains, and therefore the transport of oil down in the sand is only a few centimeters. But Corexit detaches the oil from the grains and therefore can go much deeper in it. And PAH can penetrate pretty deep and maybe has the potential to, in some shallow areas, to contaminate the water table in there. So that can help a little bit understanding on how to use detergents to Corexit on the shore, coastal environments. Oil snow, oil deposition that alters the availability of oxygen at the seafloor, and it varies a lot between the warm shelf water compared to the deep, the cold deep sea, and similar to algae as it settles down. And the oxygen consumption and by the settling oil can result in the slowing of the oil degradation process, and therefore kind of isolating it and preserve the oil in the marine surface sediment layers. And that, of course, can influence the organism living in the seafloor and thereby the benthic food web. The detailed radiocarbon analysis of the spill by the Chanton lab documented and quantified the abrupt changes that were observed in the sedimentary system in the deep Gulf. They were able to determine the effects of rapid sediment deposition event on forams and redox, sensitive metals, and pretty much summarize that there is about 3 to 5% of the oil from the blowout that were deposited on the seafloor of the deep Gulf. There's also evidence that the petrocarbon from method oxidation entered the food web from POCs, and evidence that the mercury cycle and the planktonate and coastal food webs are impacted. So these results underscore the need to determine the long-term fate of the oil on the seafloor. The Reddy Lab at Woods Hole performed a lot of field operation in order to study the fate of compounds beyond PAH. How do they degrade? And so you see all the stars there. That's the various locations where the samples were collected. So in collaboration with the Mag Lab at Florida State, they performed really what I would call transformative chemical analysis techniques. They just went beyond the GCs and were able to identify a new pool of non-native transformation products, oxygenating hydrocarbons. And they developed a new approach on how to analyze in details the various compounds. That's a very strong collaboration between the two labs. They were also able to respond very rapidly after Hurricane Ivan, with some oil patties and other things showed up on the beach, various sheens, various other spills. And so using all those samples, they calculated the mass balances on the released oil found on the beach, developed new index of biodegradation for saturates, and redefined views on the recalcitrance of biomarkers. So another collaborative work that was done in the consortium is to put together the various pieces for a regional 3D Earth system model. You see on the bottom left the hydrodynamic model. You see a blowout on the right, and what we are mixing together is various components, ocean, atmosphere, biogeochemical, and looking at how the transport of those of the oil is affected by all these. So a few highlights of this here. One of the things that the Stokes drift, or waves, the drift induced by the waves, can really alter the drift pattern of the oil particles, can be up to meters per second. Also, when you compare to the ice sphere, which is done by the Lars Hole from our collaborators in Norway, you can see the sphere on the right. And at the bottom, you see the dark paths of the spheres and the various model pathways. And it varies a lot depending on the accuracy of your model, how refined the grid is, but also on what wind forcing you use. So the message here is that you need to be probabilistic. Oil drift simulation cannot just use one model, one atmospheric forcing. It has to be probabilistic using model ensembles. Another results by Korafalu and colleagues is that the fronts that result from the Mississippi River plume that are affected also by the winds topography and the loop current intrusion do influence the hydrocarbon pathways. And in the figures at the center here, that you find that the solid line, which are the advection of Mississippi water, are in good agreement with the displacement of the DWH surface oil. Since the Mississippi River plume varies from year to year or from time to time, understanding its impact on the oil pathway is very important. Finally, to go back to some of the questions from the beginning, what is the impact of the DeSoto Canyon on the transport of particles? So what we looked at is what are the physical mechanisms between upwelling and downwelling in the DeSoto Canyon. So we use a very long-term, high-resolution ocean simulations, and we have, if you look at the three cross-sections that are on the bottom right, and you see that in green and orange, downwelling period and upwelling, and they can last from weeks to a month, and can be up to 100 meters in the DeSoto Canyon region. So when does this occur? We know that wind matters, but one of the main results that we've found is that the large-scale low-frequency events are 2 to 4 times more likely to occur after the loop current impinges. And what do we mean by impinges? On the shelf, is, you see when it is in a retracted position on the top right, it touches, and then there is a high pressure anomaly that propagates along the coast, following a little bit some work by Rob Etland. So what this high pressure suppresses the motion of an isopycnal and introduces a downwelling. You see it as it propagates along the East Coast. So that's, in brief, just a few highlights. 104 papers cannot be summarized in 15 minutes, but I hope that I conveyed some of the work that we did. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Any questions for Dr. Chassignet?